And there has been a request for one gentleman to be with us today who especially wanted to hear Walt Boyer, who wanted to speak about our new financial soundness committee. And so I did ask Walt if he would do this, and he accepted the challenge of heading up that committee. He has researched, he has worked very diligently in this regard, published a white paper, and so much more. He has assembled a fine committee to work with him, and the emails that have been forthing and backing have just been very fascinating to read. I asked Walt to give us an in-depth report, an overview of the work of the committee. We know it's not finished, but he and the committee are doing yeoman's service, and I just wanted to give special thanks to Walt and then turn the mic over to him for his presentation. And there will be time for questions after. You need a mic? Yes, you have one. Okay.
Is this working?
No.
How about now? That's fine. Okay. I'm going to work from over here because I've got some notes and I have to change the slides on here. And if Ruth didn't say, but the reason she was late is because I had trouble with my computer here. And fortunately, I hadn't planned on backups, but I had 2 backups that had been prepared during the week before. And the second one worked, and so we've got my slides available. The circumstances of traveling with PowerPoint are interesting, to say the least. The CCRC Financial Soundness Committee was formed just about a year ago. Ruth called me and asked me if I would chair that committee, and I was very hesitant at first. But we got it organized and set up, and over the summer of last year, we did get organized. By the time that we had our meeting in October, let me change this, we developed 4 goals, and those are on the slide for you to look at today. We pursued these goals rather strenuously during the intervening months, and I would say with one exception. The 3rd goal on there talks about the Federal Accounting Standards Boards and its standards, and at the time, last October, we thought we would be trying to do something with those standards. In the meantime, Jack Cumming came up with some proposed standards and model laws based on his work in the insurance company, in the insurance industry, I should say. And we looked at those, and we felt those were a much better way to go, and so we've moved in that direction. Originally, we set up with 14 of those laws that Jack had put together. The committee looked at them over the winter. They made a number of minor changes to the 14, and they made a suggestion for a new one, so we now have 15 laws, and I'm going to be talking about those. Jack mentioned those yesterday in his presentation. The order that I will present them is a little different than the order that Jack had them on his handout. The reason for this, and I want to go to another page here and pick up something. If I can find my notes. There it is. Has to do with the history of the insurance industry. And Jack, you can correct me if I got this wrong. But after the Civil War in the 19th century, there were a large number of very small insurance companies that blossomed in the various states throughout the country. People were buying insurance for this and that. And then there came some episodes that stressed those insurance companies. Things like Katrina and Sandy, that that really put heavy pressure on them, and a number of them went bankrupt. About the turn of the century, 100 years or so ago, the insurance company and legislatures got together and passed some laws that gave insurance companies special privileges across the states and in the country to protect each other, put it that way, form associations and protect each other against bankruptcy. And it's those ideas which Jack has been using to formulate these model laws, which he has proposed to the committee. These laws don't answer all the questions that residents have. This is only the start of what we hope to do, but I want to stress that these are drawn from the insurance company. And one of the things that makes it nice, from my point of view, is that I believe that most residents look at life in a CCRC as sort of an insurance policy, a lifetime insurance policy, if you will. And with that, looking at the CCRC as sort of another insurance issue, I think that's very important to address it in that light. Okay. The first of these is a standard contract provision law. And again, let me say these are not in the same order that Jack presented them yesterday. Resident contracts vary widely all over the country. And some are well balanced in describing the rights afforded to residents, as well as the provider of the services. Others have been so one-sided, as Jack pointed out yesterday, that it's questionable whether any reasonable person would accept them. Many lie in between these two extremes. We feel the public is entitled to be able to understand the commitments that they undertake when they sign one of these contracts and ensure that there is mutuality in the agreements. The model CCRC standard contract provisions law, this was the first one on the slide here, calls for the contracts to be written in understandable, clear, and unambiguous plain language that fairly balances the interests of residents and those of the business entities that offer the contracts. The second one is a non-forfeiture law, and the third one is a CCR transfer law. Many individuals that enter into a relationship with the CCRC fully intend to spend the rest of their lives there. The requirement to spend a significant portion of your life savings in that commitment seems a reasonable risk to those people. It did to me when I entered a CCRC. However, there are a few that find they've made a mistake when CCRC living. Others, for good reason, feel they need to change the class of unit that they're in. At Deerfield, we have both cottages and apartments, and many people move from cottages to apartments as they get older. The way that many CCRCs handle that poses additional cost on the resident that many eyes seem unfair, and it makes an additional drain on their life savings. These two laws are designed to allow the execution of these types of changes in a more fiscally fair and balanced manner. The standard non-forfeiture law essentially says that if a person leaves a CCRC, the refund is based on the expected life remaining, and that portion of the value of their investment in the CCRC should be returned to them. The CCRC transfer law essentially says that if you are moving from one unit to another, you should use the current funds or current value of those units as a basis for the transfer, rather than an old value, mixing an old value and a new value. And finally, the cooperative conversion law. There's a growing popularity among some residents for senior housing facilities that use cooperative ownership. And this is not only in CCRC's communities, but we see it a lot in senior housing, and it's starting to come into CCRCs. Several authorities have considered this to be the wave of the future. And what this law does is it provides some standards under which CCRCs can convert from their current fiscal model to a cooperative ownership model. The model CCRC Governance Act simply states that residents cannot be excluded from boards of directors. Now, we've had a lot of discussions during the past day about residents on boards of directors. And this law says, doesn't require that residents be on boards of directors, but it does say that they cannot be excluded simply because they're residents. It also says that residents who have a particular expertise that the board or the committee that is looking for new members might be looking for, say an accountant or a banker or something like that. Quite often you'll find in a resident someone who's got much more background and experience than anyone they can find out in the general community. And in those instances, this law says the search committee should really look towards the resident in situations like that when they find a resident that has that expertise. The prepaid medical assurance law. How many of you have received a letter this spring from your CFO saying that there's a certain portion of your entry fee and monthly fees are tax deductible? Yeah, okay. What this law is intended to do is to call for these accounts and amounts to be accounted as a liability on the CCRC's books. And the liability should be termed prepaid medical expenses. And as you get older and start needing some medical assistance, the CCRC, according to this law, is intended to use that money to help pay for some of your medical costs in the future. The Model CCRC Investment Act is an act to limit the kinds of investments that CCRCs can undertake. And yesterday we heard about the Rogue Valley Manor and some of the investments that their parent owner got into. This is a somewhat liberal description, but it's very similar to the ones that insurance companies are required to honor when they do their investments. And as we know today, insurance companies are pretty solid. They seem to have survived quite well in today's environment. And although I think that these rules are a little bit liberal, and the investment companies have done very well. And quite honestly, I think my CFO would be appalled at trying to follow some of those rules. He's a very conservative guy, and I'm sure many of yours are too. But that's what this does. It essentially ties the CCRCs to use the same investment policies that insurance companies do. The CCACH authorization, that's continuing care at home, is a new, not so new thing, but it's relatively new in that it's growing fairly rapidly throughout the country. The law we're proposing here puts a limit on how much of that kind of activity a CCRC can undertake. Essentially, it says that the scope of the activity and continuing care at home that a CCRC should undertake cannot be more than 25% of its revenue for similar services to the people that are living in the CCRC. That's a restriction that is intended to provide some security to the CCRC and not let the owners get too wild with a new model, perhaps, that might not be as safe as the one that they were using currently. The Financial Guarantee Act is a complicated one. What it does is call for states to establish an association in which all CCRCs are required to join. This association and also all continuing care and home providers are required to join. The purpose of this association is to provide insurance to the CCRCs that against insolvency for your money. That is, when a CCRC goes bankrupt, normally the debtors get paid off first. And if there's any, and then the bondholders get paid off. And if there's any money left over, then what's left can go to the residents and pay for to return on their investment. Basically, what this provides for is an association which will ensure the investments that residents make against bankruptcy, so that if you are a member and have a refundable fee, for example, money will be there to return your refundable fee. Financial responsibility law codifies a provision that exists in many continuing care contracts today that require residents to have and maintain adequate financial resources to maintain their financial responsibilities under the contract. This is particularly true for people that have Type B and Type C contracts, in which case when they go to assisted living or to skilled care, their costs rise significantly. The financial viability law calls for an annual review of CCRC reserves as sufficient to ensure the long-term viability of the institution itself, and that it can meet its long-term multi-year contracts. The standards for this calculation are provided in the law. They're rather complicated actuarial mathematics, which my friend Jack has dreamed up.
Walt's becoming an actuary mighty quick.
Yes. I even went out and bought a book on actuarial mathematics. The law also provides that a CCRC, if it can find an equivalent way of doing the evaluation rather than the one imposed by the law, that it can do it. And so if it were, for example, my particular CCRC has an annual review with an actuary as well as having an annual audit. So it would probably be allowed to use that in lieu of following the rules in this particular law. The financial liability law defines several situations under which a state regulator can take over a CCRC. And these are fairly standard. They exist in many state laws today, but we do know that a number of states have weak laws and other states, if you have read the Cole report that was done by the U.S. Senate in 2010, you will recognize that there are a number of states that don't have any laws at all controlling CCRCs. And this law is intended to provide those standard regulations and provisions under which a state regulator can take over a CCRC and essentially require the CCRC to turn its books, its property, and all its resources over to the regulator instead of running it themselves. Okay. The Self-Certification Act and the Aging Services Trusted Providers Act are both very similar. The first one applies to states, the second one applies to the federal government. Both states and federal governments have regulations concerning the care that you are given and the standards under which a CCRC can operate assisted living and skilled care. Most of those regulations do apply to assisted living and skilled care. The purpose of these laws is to allow CCRCs that have shown a exemplary, I'll use that word, exemplary compliance of those laws for a period of at least 5 years to become self-certified. That means that rather than having the state or the federal government come in and inspect them, they can have private individuals who have been licensed or certified by the governments to perform those inspections, come in and do them, rather than have the government come in and do them. As I say, the first one applies to state regulations, the second one applies to federal regulations. The model federal end-of-life law is, and many of you, I'm sure, have filled out one of those forms that says that you do or do not want a lot of attention when you get to the end of your life and maybe near death. And essentially, this law says that if you have been diagnosed with an incurable disease and are medically expected to progress towards decline and death, you can elect to forego life prolonging treatments and just receive palliative care. And essentially, the law takes people off the hook because in some states, when they do that, that kind of end-of-life care can be interpreted, let me put it that way, as being a homicide by failure to treat the patient properly. And this is intended to protect both the patient and the institution from those kinds of litigations. It also is intended to be separate and distinct from hospice care, so that if you have asked for palliative care under this contract, hospice care is not precluded as well. Where do we stand today? Well, the initial drafts have been completed. We've added one law to them. They're available on the NACRA-U website with the what is it called? the place you go to, and URL, that's what it's called, URL, is up there on the screen. They've been reviewed by the committee members. We have now gotten to the point where we're starting to go outside the committee, and we have sent the laws thus far to a few state regulators, a few state legislators, to some professionals in universities, some academics, and they've been shown to a few of the CCRC executives. The number is not large yet. Thus far we've stayed with personal contacts, either those people that are known to the committee members or that they meet in the various conferences that they attend. And we found that when they mention these laws in a conference that's being attended by a legislator or a state regulator, they suddenly become very interested. And so we've had requests from a wide variety of places for them. As time progresses, we will expand that to go to more and more places, but we don't want to move too fast. Right now, the country is absorbed with the Affordable Care Act. I think it needs a little time to get that settled before we jump into the act. So we're taking it easy, trying to do it, as we say in the Navy, smartly. That means carefully, and without making any mistakes the first time through. One of the things we are looking to do in the future is to go to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. They have a very strong influence on state legislators. And if these laws and others that we may put together, we feel that if we can convince that organization, those commissioners, to join with us, we'll have solved about 80 or 90% of our lobbying effort and with the state legislators. I should comment in addition that the other night at our board meeting, I mentioned that I felt laws are not necessarily the best way to go. Laws are hard to get enacted, and they're even harder to get changed. And I mentioned the fact that there are some groups in the engineering community, like the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, who have established standards throughout for the country that control all kinds of electrical and electronic things. All the safety provisions in this building, for example, are built to those rules to provide for your safety when you use electrical and electronic devices in the building. And I mentioned that I thought perhaps if we could put together a set of standards rather than try to enforce a bunch of laws, it might work better. Well, Larry Minix jumped on that right away, and he suggested that he might very much like to work with us on that and may be part of our negotiations with him. I also want to mention that some of our committee have been intimately involved with a couple of the sad cases that we've seen in the past few years. There's Ron Herring, who's been intimately involved with the bankruptcy of the Glebe, and has, as a result of that, went to the state and was actually asked to testify and participate in the state Senate's commission looking at CCRCs and the troubles with CCRCs. I think we owe Ron a big vote of thanks for the work he's done in that. He's made a big impression for himself and for NACRA. I don't think that Gerard Highland is here, but He also has been monitoring the situation at Oak Valley Manor, and he and others that have participated with him. Gerard is also a member of our committee, and he has given us a very detailed report of what's been going on at Oak Valley Manor. And that has educated a lot of us about the kinds of problems that can exist in CCRCs. With that, I think I'm done, and I want to thank you very much for your time.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.